So this right here is the Antec Vortex View. This is the first AIO that we've come across with Asetek's new Gen 9 pump, but that is not actually the biggest selling feature of this thing. It is this, a 5-inch 60 Hz 720p IPS display that looks absolutely stunning. Now, it does look like a smartphone hanging off the side of your AIO, but there's a lot to talk about with this thing. And personally, I prefer this to a lot of the other options out there, from the likes of ROG, MSI, Thermalright, Lianli, and a bunch of others. Then again, you might think very, very differently about that. Basically, it's what Height did with their Thick series, but infinitely more adaptable. And I can tell you one thing, this is one of the best looking screens I've come across on an AIO, bar none. It's bright, color reproduction is pretty much spot on, and viewing angles are really good too, at least when compared to what else is out there. And those viewing angles are helped by the way Antec allows you to adjust this thing. The screen is mounted to a ball joint, so it can be pointed in any direction whatsoever, or rotated 90 degrees from landscape to portrait. And once it's in position, just turn the twist lock to secure it in place. Antec has also added a multi-array RGB backlight, so you can do some pretty wicked accents on your motherboard. Hit it with just the right blend of content and lighting, and the Vortex View can really take your whole build to the next level. And you know what else can take your ITX build to the next level? It's this case from NZXT.
Seriously, if you're not cooling your PC like this, you're doing it wrong. This is a perfect workout. I don't understand why more people don't ice cool their PCs. Come on. Not many people know, but sun protection for your PC case is absolutely crucial, including sunscreen. Oh, well, everybody knows you gotta maintain a certain level of moisture in the air.
Or, you could use the airflow it already has. Sometimes simple and effective just works.
Another interesting thing that Antec has done is the way that they manage the connection between the Vortex View and your system as a whole. So the pump head connects with a USB-C cable to a breakout box that can also act as a hub for your front panel USB connectors. You then hook that up to your motherboard with an internal USB 3 cable. It's pretty simple and straightforward. The problem here is that instead of using a dedicated link between their software and the screen, Antec is running it as a USB display that Windows picks up as a secondary monitor. Now, if you watch my MSI RTX 5090 Lightning review, you'll know how much I absolutely despise this setup. There's usually connectivity issues and tons of problems with the mouse positioning because the cursor constantly heads off way onto the second screen, even when gaming. But here's the good news, guys, like, hallelujah. Antec seems to have figured out a way to properly control this thing within Windows, and they've avoided almost all of the other issues that all of the other manufacturers have encountered when running their internal screens as a secondary monitor within Windows. Now, their iUnity software is still in beta. There's still a couple of hiccups, but it's actually pretty good. Okay, so this is Antec's iUnity software, and yes, it's still very much in its beta form. They're working behind the scenes to have a final version out as soon as possible, but I want to go over this very, very quickly. So the dashboard, there's nothing here that you really need to know about except this one little thing here, and this is the Ace Up Antec sleeve. With this little toggle off, your mouse can, yes, head off into the distance onto the second screen, but with it on, finally, a hardware manufacturer is doing this when they're using this double screen mode within Windows. It captures your cursor on your primary monitor, so it's not running off all over the place even when in gaming. Thank you very much, Antec. Now, the settings is basically all the settings for the software itself. You can configure where the display is, etc., etc. The specs are your system specs, but where everything really starts coming into its own is in the cooling tab. You have a very, very straightforward control over your fans and your pump. You have different modes. You can control the curves on your pump itself and on all the CPU fans. You can set up a custom fan curve. You can set up anything that you possibly want by just dragging your little points here up and down. So just like that, and it is as easy as that. The only thing that I wish that Antec had here is a very simple apply button. I would rather the software not decide for me when I actually apply the settings. I want to be the one pushing the apply button. I wish it was down here. Very small little issue there. This is the lighting page. This controls that backlighting behind the AIO cover. So what you have here is you have a multi-array RGB with 8 zones, and that can be very, very easily changed by just going into here, selecting a color, and boom, it basically applies right away to the AIO. I'm going to turn it back to red because it's probably what looks the most stunning here, right? Now the display area is where I guess you would say all the fun happens. Right now you can see that the display is blank. All you have to do is go over here, either upload an image or have an online GIF. Now I've already set up a couple. You can see SpongeBob is over here. What you have to do is sometimes scale an image because it doesn't have one-to-one pixel mapping here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna zoom in a bit and you can see everything is happening on that screen in real time. There's also, you have rotation, you have a few other settings here. Now, the GIFs are something that's a little bit interesting, right? Because GIFs will rarely fit a 720p screen. So that's really where your scaling is gonna come in handy. The problem is that you're going to get cropping on a bunch of images. So you're gonna have to be a little bit choosy about which GIFs or which photos you actually choose if you want to have that proper scaling and you want to get all of the image within the AIO. There's also an overlay tab here, and personally I absolutely positively can't stand this thing because it just can't be controlled the way I want it to. So first we're gonna go here and we're gonna put on the stack display. I mean, you get a bunch of information about your system, which is great. The only thing is that what is actually displayed here cannot be controlled. There's also an option here that you have a more compact look, which gives you a very nice tachometer style overview. But again, the colors, the style, additional widgets here, that cannot be controlled right now. Again, it's a beta software. Supposedly it will be added in the future, but it would be really nice to have a few more options here. Now, one thing that I haven't covered yet is video. Right now, Antec doesn't have a way that you can upload video files directly to their software. So what you're gonna have to do is you're going to have to use an external player or YouTube or something like that and designate it to your second screen. So what I've done here is I've opened up Media Player on the second screen. Basically, you can see it'll overlay directly onto everything. Unfortunately, what you have to do in a lot of situations is turn off your overlay so you get that full video. But overall, look, the software here, as you play around with it, you can tell it's very functional, it's straightforward, and it's actually pretty well done. So that's the highlight feature of the Vortex View, right? And surprisingly, it works pretty well, even though it's still in a sort of immature beta form when it comes to the software side. But look, let's be honest here. You're spending $300 in the US for this AIO. So there is other expectations here. It can't just be all about the screen. The Vortex View needs to have the performance chops to back up its feature set. And in a lot of ways, that's exactly what it has. And basically, it sits at the very top of Antec's Vortex series with the best fans and fastest pump, though it uses the same radiator and tube design as the other models. Unfortunately, it also doesn't come in white yet, which is a bit odd since if you want Antec's best case in white, you can't color match it with what's technically their highest end AIO. And look, other than the screen, from tip to tail, we're basically seeing a pretty standard AIO, the one that's based on Asetek's Gen 9 pump design. And like I said a couple of minutes ago, this is actually the first time that we're encountering Asetek's Gen 9 pump. And look, I'll make no qualms about it here. We have been very, very critical of Asetek's pumps in the past, but with the Gen 9, it seems like they've listened to all of our feedback and everybody else's feedback, and they've changed this thing dramatically. Let's have a quick listen. And honestly, guys, I was pretty shocked since in our experience, Asetek pumps are some of the loudest around, but this one is whisper quiet at every single RPM level. So their engineers obviously heard our feedback from previous generation models loud and clear. Because if you look at this, every single one of the coolers with an Asetek Gen 8 or Gen 8.5 pump, well, they were among the loudest, whereas the Vortex View's Gen 9 design didn't go above our testing room's noise floor. Basically, Antec's mission here was to create an AIO that delivers sort of peak performance without getting overly loud. Their focus here was on silence before sort of balls to the wall performance. And one of the ways that they did that was capping their fans at 2000 RPM. So even with the most aggressive motherboard PWM signal on the planet, they're not going to get screaming loud when you don't want them to. So let's have a listen to those two. But look, let's pause here for a second and overlay the NZXT Kraken Elite onto these results. Against one of the absolute best noise to performance ratio AIOs we've tested to this point, the Vortex View does pretty damn good, especially at lower decibel levels where it gets all the way to around 1300 RPM before the fans head above our ambient noise levels. Another thing you probably noticed is that other than the usual sound from air movement through the radiator, the fans on this AIO are very, very quiet. Even when they're running at full tilt, there's no apparent motor hum or high-pitched bearing whine. All in all, the Vortex View is one of the quietest liquid coolers I've come across lately. And Antec, well, they've made some very interesting changes to the Asetek mounting kit too. If you remember on previous designs that we've looked at with the Asetek Gen 8 or Gen 8.5 pumps, those things were like a kit of tiny components, and then you had to swap out the retention arms between AMD and Intel systems. It was just a bloody mess. But what Antec has done is they've simplified that whole process into something that is just so much better. First of all, I absolutely love the fact that the pump side mounting hardware can be used for both AMD and Intel systems without needing to swap it out. Both mounts also automatically give a slight offset. So for Intel, the contact plate's pressure point is moved a bit further north, while the AMD mount moves it slightly south to cover the CCDs. There's just one little catch though. To get the proper offset, you'll need to mount the cooler with its tubes exiting from the 3 o'clock position on AMD and 6 o'clock for Intel. All right, so with that setup, I guess it's time for some performance testing, because from a baseline perspective, it looks like Antec has a very good AIO here with the Vortex View, but we need to see how this thing does against other 360mm AIOs. So let's start off with the 9800X3D and move from there. So let's add all of the other coolers here, ranging from the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 Pro, which is actually the worst 360mm AIO we've tested on this chip so far, to the best, Lian Li's GA2 Lite Performance and Kraken Elite. And yes, the Antec is very good, but it still lags behind the leading Lian Li cooler by about 2 degrees right across its entire decibel range. But honestly, we're splitting hairs here, since anything under 75 degrees is a complete win on this processor. Narrowing it down to 32 decibels shows a solid middle of the pack result for Antec. But we also have to remember, this is a $300 AIO with an LCD screen. And if we compare it to other similarly priced and equipped models, things, well, they don't look nearly as good. Moving a bit higher into the decibel range, and the Vortex View does do a bit better here. Though we do have to remember, the Kraken Elite is about the same price as the View, while the Ryujin 3 Extreme and Tri-X Panorama are both quite a bit more expensive. Moving on to gaming, and Antec's results suddenly become some of the best, especially at those critical low noise points. This goes to prove this AIO has been really well optimized for silence and situations where higher interior case temperatures are the norm, like here where the GPU is dumping a ton of heat into its immediate vicinity. So basically we're seeing a top 5 result here for the Vision at 32 decibels, which means the only display equipped coolers that actually beat it are the Kraken Elite and the Plus. And remember, that Plus model has a pathetically small screen too. Anyway, sticking with the AMD theme, we also have to talk about the worst case scenario, and that's a PBO tuned 9950X that sucks back a solid 250 watts when under full load. Even the best 360mm AIOs struggle to get under 85 degrees with this thing, unless they're pushed towards higher noise levels. And the Vortex View actually flexes its muscles again by essentially tying the Tri-X Panorama at 32, 33, and 34 decibels, while then pulling ahead above that. So it's pretty apparent this cooler absolutely thrives in higher thermal situations. And to me, it's pretty impressive when you're considering the competition this thing is up against. And you know what? That's so good to see in my eyes, because if you remember, Antec had been the cornerstone of PC gaming hardware for years before they dropped off, and now it just feels like they've got some of that mojo back. And now they're launching some pretty damn good products into the market once again. But I really do wish for just one thing here, guys. I want them to release this exact same AIO, so with the new Asetek pump and the upgraded fans and everything else, but without the screen, and do it at a very reasonable price, because it's got a lot of potential. Moving on to Intel, and guess what? Houston, we've got a bit of a problem here. The Vortex View goes from being one of the best coolers on a 9950X to really struggling on LGA 1851. And that's going to be a tough sell when you consider some other LCD equipped coolers like the Kraken Elite, Panorama, and Ryujin 3 Extreme all get substantially better results. And this isn't the first time that we've seen a newly designed AIO post really good results on AM5 and then fall behind on Intel. The Silent Loop 3 did the exact same thing. And I think this is because manufacturers are simply changing their priorities. Instead of Intel being the dominant player they once were, they're now being destroyed by AMD in the sales charts. So companies are simply refocusing the majority of their optimizations towards the most popular platform right now, and that is AMD. And not even the Intel gaming results can shake off the feeling that Antec's laser focused on AMD right now. Others like NZXT and Tri-X have created true cross-platform coolers, while Antec, well, they're trailing a bit further behind. But again, we absolutely have to put this into a different perspective. If we take the Tri-X out of this equation entirely, since it's such an outlier, there's only 2 degrees separating all of these AIOs, and every single one of them gets the CPU below 60 degrees. So it's not like you're sort of like fighting with heat here. These are running very, very cool right across the board. All right, so that's pretty much all of the performance testing except one last small step, something everybody always asks for, and that's fan normalized testing. How does this 360mm AIO line up against all the other ones on the market when using the same fans? So in this case, we're going to be using, of course, guess what? Still the best fans on the market, the Phanteks T30, to see how everything shakes out. So did the Vortex View get better with the Phanteks T30 at 32 decibels at least? The answer to that is absolutely. These fans shaved off a solid degree from the 9800 X3D's temperatures, which would have placed the Vortex View into the top 5 coolers we've ever tested on this CPU. But look, in the grand scheme of things, that wouldn't have changed my opinion about this AIO whatsoever. Because overall, I just feel like 360mm AIOs are just almost complete overkill for 90% of the processors on the market right now, at least in the consumer space. And we're seeing that here with the Vortex View 362, because it took every single processor we could throw at it, even a PBO tuned at 9950X, and it had absolutely no trouble cooling all of those CPUs off whatsoever. Even, actually I should say not even, especially in gaming. Like they're just not pressuring this AIO. Yes, we could probably find a Threadripper and some other CPUs out there, or even a 285K that's been overclocked to the hilt. But if you're just using the processor at base clock, well, you're not gonna have any trouble with this thing, or any other 360mm AIO for that matter. So where does that really leave us for an evaluation? Well, we have to evaluate the features that Antec is offering here, because they are charging $300 for the Vortex View. So the real focus here has to be the biggest selling feature, which is that massive screen. And I know its looks will be super polarizing between a love it or hate it response, and personally, I'm still on the fence about it. I'm not too crazy about the fact that it looks like a smartphone hanging in the middle of midair, but at the same time, it looks a lot better than a lot of the other designs out there. But what I'm not on the fence about is the software experience, because even in its early beta form, it's simply one of the best around. Sure, there's still some limitations here and there, but it's not overly complicated. Everything is right there at your fingertips, it's ultra responsive, and the memory footprint is super compact. So while it might not absolutely top every single one of our performance charts, I think it's sort of mission accomplished for Antec with the Vortex View. So anyways, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day, guys.